Chapter 7, Fast and Forgettable, a controlled study of novices' performance, learning, workload, and emotion in AI-assisted and human pair programming paradigms. Chapter Preamble. This chapter carries out Aim 3, the final empirical investigation in this dissertation, through an experiment comparing the assistance of GitHub Copilot to a social human-human pair programming alternative. The findings of chapters 2, 3, 5, and 6 suggested that emotional connection might be lacking in novice-aid interactions. Pair programming between humans has been a useful approach in both professional and educational settings for many years. Aides are often conceptualized as partners or assistants, but it is unclear whether the benefits of human programming partners are similarly provided by aides. The work described here explores this issue by comparing human and AI teammates, focusing on initial team performance, workload and emotion, and individual retest performance, a measure of learning. The findings are then explained in relation to the control value theory of emotion. Authorship, reuse, and licensing statement. This chapter was co-authored with James Prather, Paul Denny, Juho Leininen, Raymond Pettit, and Sarah L. Riggs, who consented to the inclusion of this chapter in this dissertation. Its contents may appear in a future ACM publication. The license for that paper applies to this chapter. The fallback license is listed on the copyright page for this dissertation. ACM allows complete reuse of published papers and doctoral dissertations per the following section of the ACM Author Rights Policy, retrieved on March 16, 2026. Authors can include partial or complete papers of their own in a dissertation as long as citations and DOI pointers to the versions of record in the ACM digital library are included. Abstract. Code-generating artificial intelligence has gained popularity within both professional and educational programming settings over the past several years. While research and pedagogy are beginning to cope with this change, computing students are left to bear the unforeseen consequences of AI amidst a dearth of empirical evidence about its effects. Though pair programming between students is well studied and known to be beneficial to self-efficacy and academic achievement, it remains underutilized and further threatened by the proposition that AI can replace a human programming partner. In this paper, we present a controlled pair programming study with 22 participants who wrote code under time pressure in teams of 2 and individually with GitHub Copilot for 20 minutes each. They were incentivized by bonus compensation to balance performance with understanding and were retested individually on the programming tasks after a retention interval of 1 week. Subjective measures of workload and emotion, as well as objective measures of performance and learning, retest performance, were collected. Results showed that participants performed significantly better with GitHub Copilot than their human teammate, and several dimensions of their workload were significantly reduced. However, the emotional effect of the human teammate was significantly more positive and arousing as compared to working with Copilot. Furthermore, there was a non-significant absolute retest performance reduction in the AI condition and a larger retest performance decrement in the AI condition. We recommend that educators strongly consider revisiting pair programming as an educational tool in addition to embracing modern AI. 7.1 Introduction. Generative Artificial Intelligence, Gen AI, powers a number of tools programmers and computing students can use to assist in writing code, solving problems, and completing other coding-related tasks. These include general-purpose chatbots like ChatGPT and editor-based coding toolsets like GitHub Copilot, the focus of this work. Copilot is branded as an, quote, AI pair programmer, end quote, a nod to a team programming methodology popularized in the early 2000s called, quote, pair programming, end quote. Because AI-powered behaviors can resemble human behaviors, Gen AI is often framed as a human-like assistant that can help with work otherwise done alone or with another human. Though research has begun to compare the new AI-assisted paradigm to traditional solo and pair programming paradigms, the vast breadth of potential harms and benefits still remains largely unexplored. AI assistance poses special threats to computing students. A burgeoning ecosystem of educational AI might potentially help with learning, but commonplace tools developed for professionals, i.e. GitHub Copilot, may not. In general, code-generating AI improves basic programming performance, but programmers can become reliant on its help. Then, when AI becomes unavailable or makes mistakes, programmers may be less practiced at the very manual intervention or critical thinking called for most by such a situation. This is a studied phenomenon in human automation interaction called an, quote, irony of automation, end quote, and has many parallels to human AI interaction. Aside from over-reliance, pair programming may offer more than Copilot from a social perspective. Although AI is highly reliable and accurate as a programming assistant and presents a considerable advantage for computing students struggling to learn basic programming concepts, it falls short regarding its modality, which is currently limited to text and speech-to-text interaction. Human interactions, by contrast, typically involve facial expressions, body language, two-way verbal communication, etc. That is, though Copilot may match or exceed the informational capacity of peer or instructor assistants, it could fail for other reasons to aid the learning and academic performance of a computing student as much as a human. In this study, we build upon recent work by comparing human-human pair programming to programming with GitHub Copilot through the lens of the control value theory of emotion. We conducted a mixed methods study comparing performance, learning, workload, and emotion between these paradigms using a within-subjects design involving 2 study sessions 1 week apart. We found that despite lower workload and higher performance with GitHub Copilot, participants learned comparably and experienced more intense positive emotions with their human partners. Our findings suggest the unique advantages of human-human programming over AI-assisted programming in computing education. We are guided by the following research questions. RQ1. To what extent does actual and perceived programming performance differ between the human-human and human-AI team paradigms during a learning effort? RQ2. To what extent does learning retention from a programming effort differ between the human-human and human-AI team paradigms? RQ3. To what extent does the workload, i.e. mental, temporal, effort, frustration, associated with educational programming differ between the human-human and human-AI team paradigms? RQ4. To what extent does the emotional impact of educational programming as measured by emotional valence and arousal differ between the human-human and human-AI team paradigms? 7.2 Related work. 7.2.1 Code Generating AI in Computing Education. Empirical research about the educational impacts of code-generating AI assistants like GitHub Copilot is mixed. Though a number of tools have been developed specifically for use in computing education, here we focus on the broader landscape of commodity Gen AI such as Copilot and ChatGPT. AI assistants are frequently observed to enhance novices' programming performance, but have yet to show similar effects on learning. When computing students are allowed to use AI, they sometimes use it adaptively as a learning resource, but other times use it to avoid active engagement with the material. Avoidant behaviors of this nature are associated with worse learning in computing courses and worse psychological well-being more generally. Though AI can reduce workload and programming anxiety, it may lack the conflict inherent within effective Socratic learning. Limited research about learning suggests that AI assistance is probably best used conservatively, in combination with traditional solo and paired paradigms. A possible avenue for enhancing learning would be increased motivation or self-efficacy, which tends to predict academic success. One study of 45 students found that using AI in a computing course significantly improved self-efficacy, and at least 2 studies have found benefits for motivation. On the other hand, another study found that early and frequent AI use in a computing course was most common among students with low self-efficacy and course grades. Though one study found that programmers take credit for AI's successes and blame it for failures, multiple others found the opposite. Overall, it seems that use of commodity AI in computing education brings much needed help at the cost of autonomy. Code-generating AI substantially changes the programming process, leading students to lose metacognitive control and awareness of appropriate behaviors. 7.2.2 Pair Programming in Computing Education. Pair programming is highly regarded in computing education for its positive effects on student performance and well-being. Multiple meta-analyses have found that programming in pairs allows novices to work faster and tackle more challenging problems than they could alone, with lower or comparable effort. Beck et al. Argued for the productivity of pair programming for professionals too, encouraging it as a tenet of the extreme programming XP method to, quote, write all production programs with 2 people sitting at one machine, end quote. Pairing can even be more productive than a divide-and-conquer approach because of collaborative synergy. In the context of education, pair programming is generally more enjoyable and better for learning than solo programming. Students also tend to believe in its merits, reinforcing them by a placebo-like effect. Challenges with educational pair programming usually stem from issues of partner compatibility, either expertise or personality, and logistical concerns. Though it is typically best to pair students of similar ability level, diversity of perspectives may stimulate more productive discussion. 7.2.3 Learning in human-human versus human-AI pairs. To reconcile potential benefits of AI and human teammates, several studies have compared the two paradigms experimentally. In 2021, before modern Gen AI, Kutal et al. Compared a human tutor to a simulated automated agent scripted and performed by a human in the Wizard of Oz style. They found that multimodal communication and more lengthy, in-depth discussions were advantages of the human tutor. A later study interviewed software engineers and programming students after they programmed alone, in pairs, and with AI, ChatGPT and Copilot. They found participants were motivated by the alleviation of mundane tasks and satisfied by AI assistance, but preferred human teammates for their better knowledge, energy, and scrutiny. Moving into education, Penny et al. Conducted a between-subjects qualitative experiment of 20 CS1 students who studied a concept through text chat with either an AI tool or a human tutor. The students generally found human assistants more trustworthy and reliable for learning, but liked AI assistants better for fast, low-stakes, judgment-free exploration. The authors argue that novices see AI help-seeking as low risk and low reward, while they see human tutoring as high risk and high reward. Liu et al. Conducted a within-subject study in an advanced web development course. 39 students completed programming assignments in human-human, human-AI, and human-human-AI teams. Assignment scores were the highest in the human-human-AI condition, followed by human-human, and then human-AI. Qualitative data showed weaker partners were substantially helped by their stronger counterparts, but sometimes stronger partners felt held back. Pairs of weak partners struggled to make progress together. AI helped with this, but also dominated the team in the process. Participants felt they could communicate ineffectively and still obtain helpful results. This marks a potential harm to the metacognitive skill of analyzing and expressing a question or goal, which has previously been considered as helped by the act of prompting. Finally, Fan et al. Reported a quasi-experimental between-subject study of 234 students in a web development course who programmed in either solo, human-human, or human-AI paradigms. They found that performance was comparably higher in both paired conditions compared to the solo condition. Programming anxiety was most reduced by the human-AI paradigm, but perceived collaboration and social presence was highest in human-human teams. 7.2.4 Theoretical Frameworks, Control Value and Cognitive Load. Our theoretical framework draws from Peck-Run's Control Value Theory, CVT, to consider the difference between human-human and human-AI programming teams through the important lens of emotional affect. CVT describes how humans' emotions follow from appraisals of both control over an achievement context and the value of achievement outcomes. When learning activities are low in value, students can feel low-energy negative emotions like boredom, for example, while feeling in control during studying for a high-value grade can induce strong positive emotions like excitement. As with related emotional theories, CVT conceptualizes emotion with at least two basic dimensions: valence, positive versus negative, and arousal, low versus high energy. A third dimension in CVT is the object focus, which has been expanded recently beyond only the achievement activity and its outcome to also include epistemic incongruities, informational conflicts, social beings, self and others, and existential feelings of vitality, health and mortality. In the context of educational team programming, relevant foci are the activity, programming itself, the outcomes, satisfaction, grades, or money, incongruities, differences in teammates' perspectives, the self, a focus for pride or shame, and others, foci for liking or commiseration. Any of these foci can be the object of any given combination of valence and arousal. Research in writing studies and the neuroscience of creativity likewise shows that motivation and persistence in cognitively demanding work are mediated by limbic system activation, especially in social or emotionally meaningful contexts. Human collaborators naturally stimulate the emotional and motivational circuits that sustain effort. See also references 70, 69, 77, 56. While AI tools, pleasant but affectively flat, rarely trigger the same engagement. Considering emotional foci is useful because it broadens the possibilities for how to reach productive and enjoyable emotional states. If only considering outcome value, an AI assistant that helps complete satisfying projects or earn key grades might be chosen over a human teammate for promoting student well-being. AI assistants can also disrupt metacognition, leading students to feel overconfident in their own programming abilities on account of AI-driven progress. The programming activity itself might feel more pleasant with AI for this reason. Similarly, lessened incongruities might make AI seem more emotionally preferable, since its design necessarily tries to inspire contentment, surprise, and delight over disagreement and conflict. Though in isolation undesirable, conflict can be a catalyst not only for learning, but also for coping skills that promote emotional resilience. Unfortunately, sycophantic AI appeals to students' avoidant tendencies that seek to acclaim the righteousness of their existing perspectives. We hypothesize that conflict, whether good or bad, is actually an essential adaptive property of human pair programming that AI is not currently effective at mimicking. Furthermore, AI's excessive competence compared to novices is a dangerous precursor for it to assume control over programming tasks, flattening the emotional reward of a positive outcome value according to CVT. This could also lead to a focal transition to the self. Though Bandura's theory associates high self-efficacy to low arousal, we fear that low arousal and neutral to negative valence are harmful to pride and thus self-efficacy. Kalia labels this phenomenon as, quote, AI obscurity, end quote, whereby the credit a student normally enjoys for themselves is given instead to the AI assisting them. Finally, for social foci, it is unclear how the emotional impacts of pseudo-social interactions with AI compare to those of true human social interactions. Once again, sycophantic AI creates a hazardous attraction to seek the safe agreement of a supportive AI tool, abandoning rewarding human interactions in the process. Finally, we consider the related phenomenon of workload through the lens of cognitive load theory, CLT. CLT states that learning activities have intrinsic difficulty as standalone tasks as well as germane difficulty from extracting generalizable skills and knowledge from the experience. Finally, extraneous load adds superfluous difficulty to the learning process due to secondary minutiae such as, in the case of programming, unclear instructions or confusing interfaces. With a limited cognitive capacity, students experience that these three sources of load stack, meaning excessive extraneous load leaves too little capacity left to effectively learn from the activity. Regarding extraneous load, qualitative research is mixed regarding AI's effect for programmers. While AI offloads considerable effort for expressing the syntax of a particular problem-solving approach, interacting with it adds new sources of confusion and overload. More importantly, there is no accepted standard for an optimal level of total workload on learning tasks, though research from disparate fields suggests that some moderate balance is best. Clearly, if AI removes an activity's intrinsic load, there is no stimulus to encourage growth. Therefore, drawing from CVT, we anticipate human-human programming to bring together higher workload with strong positive emotions in line with activity-based, social, and conflict-centric emotional object foci rather than an outcome focus. 7.3 Method. 7.3.1 Participants. The study was conducted in accordance with the Declaration of Helsinki and approved by the Institutional Review Board (IRB) for Social and Behavioral Sciences (SBS) at the University of Virginia, Protocol number 7557, on July 22, 2025. Electronic informed consent was obtained from each participant. The IRB permitted us to mislead and deceive participants to support the study design, so we formally debriefed participants about this deception at the conclusion of the study. They were allowed to withdraw their consent at any time. No participants were concerned about the deception or withdrew consent. 22 participants were recruited by convenience sampling via email advertisements to roughly 900 engineering and data science students, and in-class announcements to roughly 800 undergraduates across 2 sections of 2000 level CS, CS2, Data Structures and Algorithms, and 3 sections of 3000 level CS, 2 of Software Development and 1 of CS3, Data Structures and Algorithms 2. Eligibility criteria included minimum age of 18, English fluency, novice or intermediate Python programming ability, and willingness to adhere to the study's multi-stage protocol. This protocol included a requirement to abstain from studying Python-related material for 1 week between study sessions, precluding most CS1 students from participating. Of 62 prospective participants, 25 followed through to a screening for honesty about their ability level. See screening tasks in our online appendices. 2 were found ineligible for sub-novice ability levels. 1 dropped out after screening, and none were found ineligible for super intermediate ability level. The remaining 22 participants completed the full study. The participants were mostly male, 16 male, 6 female, and Asian, 15 Asian, 10 white, 1 Hispanic Latinx, and were aged 18 to 29. X bar equals 20.8, S equals 3.7, X tilde equals 18. For ethical reasons, they were not asked where they learned about the study. However, the median age of 18 suggests that many were undergraduates in their first post-secondary year. Regarding disabilities and impairments, 1 participant self-reported having a physical impairment, and 3 reported having a cognitive or attentional impairment. None were excluded from the study. All participants had at least some experience with general-purpose AI chatbots, while all but 5 had at least some prior experience with GitHub Copilot or a similar tool. As another measure of programming ability, we administered the Steinhorst self-efficacy instrument. Summary statistics: X bar equals 5.6, S equals 0.8, X tilde equals 5.6, indicated that participants on average had self-efficacy consistent with students from other institutions at the end of their introductory CS1 courses, i.e. reference 72. X bar equals 5.5, S equals 1.0. 7.3.2 Setup. The programming setup included 2 Windows desktop computers, 2 identical 32-inch monitors, 2 keyboards, and 2 mice. 2 versions of the Visual Studio Code, VS Code, version 1.104.1, Integrated Development Environment, IDE, were configured on Windows 11 with Python 3.11.13 and the PyTest testing framework. Both had the standard Python extension, but one also had the GitHub Copilot v1.372.0 extension with chat, v0.31.1. The chat extension was configured to use GPT 4.1, the flagship unlimited model included with Copilot's educational free tier at the time. The non-Copilot IDE had a standard Python IntelliSense autocomplete from the Python extension. 2 experimental workspace folders and 1 training folder contained sets of human eval tasks consisting of 1 PDF prompt, 1 Python file with an empty function to implement, and 1 testing file. The IDE was set up to run and test code either graphically or in the terminal. Participants were permitted to use Google Chrome web browser and the Google search engine. AI search overviews were disabled, and using any AI in the browser was not allowed. Browsing history was tracked to ensure adherence to this restriction. 7.3.3 Tasks. Tasks were selected from a subset of the human eval dataset used for a prior study. These handwritten Python tasks are often used to benchmark LLMs and AI code generators. Each task comes with an English prompt and a set of automated tests. The prior study involved CS1 students completing timed human eval tasks either alone or with the assistance of Copilot. 8 tasks, each with a completion time of roughly 5 minutes, were organized into 2 pools of 4 tasks as similar as possible in difficulty to match the planned 20-minute time limit. The human eval tasks used were Pool X, 14, 52, 72, 0, and Pool Y, 35, 9, 24, 18. Based on the prior study, the expected completion times of the tasks should be very similar across the 2 task pools. In the prior study, students completed the tasks in approximately 10 minutes on average, with AI assistance, and in approximately 25 minutes solo. As mentioned in section 7.3.2, task prompts were encoded in a PDF format. The skeleton code was stripped of the prompt text so that Copilot could not ingest it automatically. Instead, any context beyond the function stub had to be provided by the participant. Copilot was known to be very reliable for the tasks at hand, as this is the case for many simple educational programming tasks. We confirmed that Copilot Chat was able to generate a passing solution for each of the 8 tasks in one shot by copying the text of the PDF into the chat and asking Copilot to solve the problem. Participants were not advised of this or any other strategy, but were aware that Copilot could not read the contents of the PDF on its own. 7.3.4 Experimental Design. The study used a within-subjects design with the within-subjects factor of team type, human-human versus human-AI. For the first study session, 2 participants worked together once and separately with Copilot once. Roughly 1 week later, they each repeated both trials separately, without Copilot. Figure 7.1 shows the 8 possible design possibilities that were counterbalanced, rotated, across participants. 7.3.5 Procedure. As a prerequisite for study eligibility, participants were required to attend a free 1-hour workshop about GitHub Copilot, its benefits and drawbacks, and its major features. Next, they had to pass a screening to demonstrate their attention during the workshop and confirm their ability level as novice or intermediate by attempting the screening tasks. See our online appendices. Using a think aloud technique in the presence of an experimenter. Eligible participants were paired based on their schedules and the requirement to have no prior relationships between programming partners. On the day of their first session, a pair of participants met in the lab. They provided electronic informed consent and watched an orientation and training video. Their assigned goal was to, quote, balance productivity and understanding the code, end quote, as they programmed. They were deceived to believe that a final score would be calculated by a secret weighting between their Session 1 score, productivity, and their Session 2, quote, retention test, end quote, understanding score. See equation 7.1. They were also deceived to believe that they needed a top 15% score to win a $10 bonus on top of their base compensation. In reality, there was no grand score calculated and all participants were given the bonus. Furthermore, information about the nature of the, quote, retention test, end quote, was withheld from the participants until the second week, when they were informed that it was simply a repeat of the tasks from the prior week. Following the training video, participants demonstrated their competencies on a practice task pool consisting of the 3 screening tasks. They practiced running and testing code and using Copilot before demonstrating their competencies and understanding of the rules. They also completed a short background questionnaire that contained the Steinhorst self-efficacy inventory. Next, they completed 2 20-minute trials, one in each condition, according to one of the 4 possible design permutations, see figure 7.1, along with questionnaires about emotion, workload, self-perceived performance, and their qualitative experience, see timeline in figure 7.2a. Given they were balancing performance and understanding, they were instructed to use any extra time to study their solutions with their teammate, i.e., if they completed all 4 tasks in less than 20 minutes. Prior to the human-human trial, they were briefed on the popular driver and navigator pair programming model. They were not required to use this model and were allowed time to discuss their teamwork strategy before the timer started. At the end of each trial, code was saved in its final state for post hoc scoring against the unit tests from human eval. Following a roughly 1-week gap that varied slightly based on scheduling availability, x bar equals x tilde equals 1.0, x min equals 0.8, x max equals 1.29, participants returned for session 2 where they took the retention test consisting of repeating each of the task pools from the prior week alone. See figure 7.2b. Before leaving, participants were formally debriefed about the deception involved in the study in accordance with the approved IRB protocol. Compensation of $7 per half hour plus a flat $10 bonus was sent to each participant as a digital gift card. 7.3.6 Data Collection. Emotion. Participants reported their subjective emotional valence and arousal 3 times during session 1, see Figure 7.2a, according to Russell's circumplex model of affect. They used 7-point Likert scales coded 1 to 7. To account for emotional interference between trials, the dependent measures were changes in valence and arousal ratings, after minus before. Workload. A digital version of the popular 6-item NASA Task Load Index, NASA TLX, was used to measure workload, the toll that performance takes on a human. Since TLX asks about workload over a period of time, it is not represented as a difference from a baseline like emotion. Performance and learning. Session 1 team performance was quantified on a 100-point scale by a function, see equation 7.2, that combines the number of tasks completed out of 4 worth 20 points for each task with the amount of time remaining out of the 20 minutes allocated at the moment that the task count was first reached. Learning was quantified via Session 2 solo performance scores using the same formula. This approach provides internally valid ratio scaling properties, i.e., completing more tasks and completing them more quickly are rewarded proportionally, and completing fewer tasks very fast can never be rewarded more than completing more tasks. For example, completing 2 tasks instantly would score 50, whereas completing 3 tasks with no time to spare would score 60. Perceived performance. We also collected a self-grade from participants, as we were not confident the NASA TLX performance dimension distinguished clearly between one's own performance and that of their teammate. Qualitative data. At the very end of Session 1, participants were asked to type free response text comparing and contrasting the 2 teaming conditions and describing in what ways each was advantageous over the other. The exact questions can be found in our online appendices. 7.3.7 Data Analysis. All analyses were conducted in R with a significance threshold of alpha equals 0.05. To estimate the effect of the treatment, AI teammate, relative to the control, human teammate, we used ordinary least squares OLS regression with studentized wild cluster bootstrapping, WCB, for inference. WCB was chosen to address the small sample size and dependence in the data, including repeated observations per participant and nesting within human pairs, i.e., each participant belongs to exactly one team, so observations from teammates are correlated. Compared to alternatives, this approach provides reliable inference under multi-way clustering with few clusters. We tested for potential confounds due to task order or difference in the 2 task pools by performing walled tests using LM test, walled test, vcove equals sandwich, vcove BS, R equals 999, type equals wild-web. These factors did not significantly improve model fit, p greater than 0.1 in all cases, indicating that the study design and counterbalancing was effective. Therefore, single predictor models were used for all research questions. Final inference was performed using F wild cluster boot using boot test B equals 9999, type equals web. Effect sizes, hedges G, were computed and interpreted with effect size, RM_D, method equals AV, adjust equals true, which used mean aggregation at the team level and the Cumming standardization method. Because we performed many hypothesis tests, we grouped p-values into families by research question, RQ1, RQ2, RQ3, and RQ4, and adjusted them with Benjamini-Hochberg, BH, FDR method to control the family-wise error rate, i.e. false discovery rate, at alpha equals 0.05. Finally, qualitative data was used to contextualize and explain each family of results. Rather than constituting a substantive standalone qualitative analysis, this was intended to help triangulate and validate the quantitative findings. As such, the method was very simple and involved one author selecting related quotes from the exit questionnaire responses to represent a diversity of perspectives from participants. To ensure fair representation of participants' perspectives, each participant was quoted exactly once, with selections distributed approximately uniformly across the 4 research questions. All collaborators read all exit questionnaire responses to confirm that the reported quotes fairly represented expressed sentiments. No formal coding process was performed. 7.4 Results. 7.4.1 Team Performance. Figure 7.3a shows a scatter plot of the actual and perceived performance of human-human and human-AI teams during session 1, where participants were balancing performance and understanding of their solutions. There is a clear trend for higher scores in the AI condition, with most teams completing all tasks in both conditions, but faster with AI. Participants' individual self-grades, which were clearly distinguished from the team's joint performance, still generally followed the team's actual performance. The family of hypothesis tests for RQ1 is presented in Table 7.1. The family-wise error rate was controlled between these two tests. The performance score was roughly 14 points higher out of 100 when the teammate was co-pilot instead of a human, a statistically significant difference. P adjusted less than 0.001. This large effect corresponds to an additional 7/10 of a task, or the same number of tasks but faster by a margin exceeding half of the total time limit. The upper plot in figure 7.3b shows that both the score distribution and the median score were higher with AI. However, participants' self-grades showed a non-significant p greater than 0.1 trend in the opposite direction. In other words, though participants achieved significantly better actual performance with the AI, they did not feel that their individual performance was significantly better in either condition. Participants could tell Copilot gave them a performance advantage, with K17 noting that, quote, AI definitely gets things done a lot faster than humans, end quote. They also appreciated its wealth of knowledge. K4 recalled that, quote, there was some Python stuff that both my teammate and I didn't know, but AI could provide that information, end quote. This led to conclusions that, quote, if you're trying to get work done, the AI is much more successful, end quote. K6, and usually, quote, goes for an optimal solution, end quote. K22, whereas, quote, humans are wrong much more often, end quote. K6. On the other hand, participants' descriptions of how they collaborated with their teammates helps to explain why they did not take credit for AI enhancement in their self-grades. Participant K12 described a multi-stage process they used with their human teammate, starting with strategies and then comparing alternative options and discussing them prior to implementation. However, with Copilot, they, quote, didn't even think about the task, end quote, but, quote, instead, I just copy and pasted the PDF and send it to AI. End quote. Being more engaged in the human-human connection made K13 feel, quote, like I contributed more to the group, end quote. Participant K11 found this communicative process, quote, more stimulating, end quote, than messaging Copilot, quote, because you get to discuss what methods you think will work and what methods you think don't work, end quote. In other words, there's a validation of each teammate's perspective as useful to the team. With Copilot, its superior performance makes the programmer feel as if they are much less needed. 7.4.2 Individual Learning. Participants knew they would return 1 week after session 1 for a, quote, retention test, end quote, i.e. session 2. Unbeknownst to them, this test consisted of repeating both sets of tasks from the prior session, but with no teammate of any kind. This way, their retest performance was a proxy for their learning or understanding of the tasks depending, theoretically, on with which teammate they were first exposed to that particular set of tasks. The lower plot in figure 7.3b shows the distribution of retest scores by previous teammate. Learning with a human showed a trend for higher retest performance. Table 7.2 shows the family of hypothesis tests for RQ2. The family-wise error rate was controlled across these 4 tests. Relative retest performance was worse for the AI condition, a marginally significant difference. P less than 0.05, less than P adjusted, less than 0.1. But absolute retest performance was not significantly different, P greater than 0.1. The relative constant indicates participants generally performed worse on the retest than they did working in teams. But the zero-inclusive confidence interval means their performance was statistically comparable. However, due to the higher initial performance with AI, the further retest drop by roughly 19 points of 100 in the AI condition constituted a large effect. See also figure 7.3b. When considering only the 11 participants indicated as the weaker teammate within each of their human-human teams, the lower mean retest performance was also not statistically significant, P greater than 0.1. However, when considering only the 11 stronger teammates, the lower retest performance was marginally significant. After p-value adjustment, p less than 0.05, less than p adjusted less than 0.1. Hedges G indicated this was a small-sized effect, at less than 4 points of 100 on average. The confidence intervals correspond to learning with AI costing stronger teammates between 30 seconds and 7 minutes for an equivalent score on the 20-minute retest compared to learning with the weaker teammate. Notably, though the mean absolute performance difference was larger for weaker teammates, the variability was much higher, with some retesting better on AI-learned tasks and other on human-learned tasks. Participants' reflections were also mixed regarding whether the AI or human teammate was better for learning, though they generally seemed to favor the human. Because of its wide knowledge base, Copilot was fast and reliable for helping participants to understand code. Participant K1 found that Copilot, quote, can answer more of your questions than a human can, end quote. It was also great for understanding the syntax of Python, which was helpful for many participants who were recruited from Java courses. For example, K15 said, quote, I felt confident in my ability to do all of the programs in Java, but not so in Python. So using Copilot felt like using training wheels on a bicycle to enhance my initial understanding of Python, end quote. However, K15 also found that Copilot often removed the need to think, whereas with the human, quote, we had to think out our solutions, exercising our brains, end quote. Participant K7 echoed the same sentiment, saying, quote, I think that the AI teammate limited me in my ability to think, whereas that was not the case with the human teammate, end quote. This pattern also led K8 to the conclusion that, quote, there was a better understanding of the code that was written between both people, end quote. Even though Copilot was probably a better quality learning resource than most human teammates were to each other, the natural ways they chose to approach the interaction meant that they felt less engaged with the programming concepts in the AI condition. 7.4.3 Workload. To compare workload between the two teaming conditions, we explored 4 of the 6 dimensions of the NASA TLX: mental demand, temporal demand, effort, and frustration. We excluded physical demand and perceived overall performance as unhelpful for answering RQ3. Figure 7.4a shows how workload ratings following the team trials differed by condition, with workload generally appearing lower with AI. Table 7.3 shows the family of hypothesis tests for RQ3. The family-wise error rate was controlled across these 4 tests. Mental demand, temporal demand, and effort were all significantly lower with the AI teammate, p adjusted less than 0.01. with large effect sizes. Only frustration, which was low in both conditions, was lower by a non-significant margin, p greater than 0.1. The feedback from the exit questionnaire aligned with the lower workload ratings observed in the AI condition. Participants mentioned how working with Copilot was, quote, leaps and bounds easier, end quote, K18, such that some participants were, quote, not stressed at all, end quote, K21. In general, Copilot's high performance was often mentioned alongside a less effortful experience. Building on prior comments about thinking less with Copilot, K9 emphasized how with the human, quote, you have to use more brain power, end quote. Regarding frustration, which is an emotionally charged aspect of workload, participants did not seem to mention such feelings in either case. This is consistent with the low ratings for both conditions. Participant K3 did mention one circumstance that might be a source of frustration with Copilot, saying, quote, it cannot follow complex logic or understand something that is not on the screen or given to it, end quote. In other words, Copilot lacked the, quote, bigger picture, end quote, K17, of implicit needs that humans often assume among each other. Participant K10 mentioned an emotionally salient reason for higher stress in the human condition instead. Quote, programming with a human was slightly more stressful and rushed for me because I felt pressure to keep up with the pace at which my teammate was reading through the prompts and coming up with answers, end quote. On the other hand, they felt no stress with Copilot because the, quote, fear of human judgment was removed, end quote, K10. Perhaps it's not frustration, but rather temporal demand or some other dimension which captures this negative experience. Though other results have suggested participants moved through content hastily with Copilot, peer pressure could have also caused weaker teammates to feign understanding before they were really ready to advance, harming their later retest performance. 7.4.4 Emotion. Emotion ratings were taken 3 times during session 1 surrounding team performance. Figure 7.4b shows that ratings generally reflected positive and aroused moods. Participants were more neutrally aroused at their first measurement, with more positive and aroused emotions after programming with a human, and less positive emotions after programming with AI. Figure 7.4c shows the emotional effects of the programming trials by condition. Note that depending on which ordering participants were assigned, their post-trial mood might have followed the baseline or the opposite condition. The choice of statistical method should account for this dependence. The family of hypothesis tests in Table 7.4 for RQ4 show that the emotional impact of the AI teammate was significantly less positive and less arousing than that of the human teammate. The family-wise error rate was controlled across these 2 tests. Confidence intervals indicate that this difference was not just a lesser positive effect, but likely a difference in sign in both cases. That is, an AI teammate seems to reduce emotional valence and arousal slightly, while a human teammate seems to increase them both slightly. These large effects arise in a circumstance where participants can easily compare the 2 conditions. That is, one's mood decreases with AI can be related to following a higher state from the human condition and vice versa. Qualitative data strongly supported the quantitative findings about emotion. As mentioned with the frustration dimension of workload, there does seem to be some crossover between mood and workload. For example, K19 reported that, quote, emotionally speaking, working with a human partner will give you a different sense of courage and stress. That is, the human gives you the confidence to work through challenges, but also raises the stakes, heightening emotional arousal and perhaps workload. In terms of valence, participants like K5 found that, quote, working with a teammate felt better because you help each other, which gives more fulfillment, end quote. Similarly, K14 said that with the human, quote, I feel like my overall mood improved, end quote. Finally, one comment crystallizes how some participants likely struggled to disentangle valence from arousal when providing their ratings. According to K16, working with a human, quote, keeps the mental and social energy up, so I was more happy/excited when coding, end quote. They experienced feeling not only, quote, energized, arousal, but also, quote, happy, valence, and, quote, excited, valence and arousal. Another interpretation is that valence and arousal simply tended to move together. 7.5 Discussion. 7.5.1 RQ1. To what extent does actual and perceived programming performance differ between the human-human and human-AI team paradigms during a learning effort? Overall, we found that participants performed better with Copilot than in pairs, but this was not reflected by correspondingly high self-grades. Participants did not feel worse about their own performance when using Copilot. They simply did not take personal credit for its help. Qualitative data painted a broader picture, showing that participants felt more useful and valued with human partners, though this outcome wasn't fully reflected in their self-grades. One likely reason for the mismatch between these confidence reports is that Copilot's consistently superior performance made students reluctant to credit themselves for success. Copilot's superior knowledge base and task performance positioned it as the unequivocally stronger teammate. And because its responses were both confident and sycophantic, participants often experienced it as taking over the problem and supplying a perfect solution, leaving little space for their own contribution. From a control value theory perspective, working with Copilot clearly increased outcome value, but reduced the programmer's control over that outcome. Copilot's assistance also reduced activity focal value by taking away the meaningful challenge associated with programming. In the human team, however, leadership was negotiable and shifting, and shared goals were assumed. Participants knew their teammate was of similar ability in pursuing the same balance between performance and understanding. By contrast, few participants took the time to articulate contextual factors like these to Copilot, contributing to participants finding Copilot to be less collaborative than their human teammate. CVT predicts social object foci, oneself or a compatriot, to evoke positive emotions when either partner can contribute to a shared goal. For example, being helpful to another inspires satisfaction and pride, while being helped by another evokes gratitude and liking. If the balance of these were to shift, as when partners differ greatly in ability level, or Copilot outshines the programmer, value can be high but control is low. That is, a weak partner becomes reliant on the stronger, or Copilot, to obtain either outcome, activity, or social value. Interventions such as requiring context specifications or enabling multimodal communication with AI could narrow the current gap, but for now, human interaction still supports these collaborative dynamics more effectively than generative AI. 7.5.2. To what extent does learning retention from a programming effort differ between the human-human and human-AI team paradigms? There was a trend toward worse learning retention for tasks learned with AI rather than with a human teammate, but these differences were mostly not significant. This general trend aligns with recent empirical work showing that AI assistance during learning can impair long-term knowledge retention. Curiously, participants' absolute retest performance actually aligned better to their initial self-grades than to their team performance, suggesting that students may be better judges of their own learning than objective assessments corrupted by AI involvement. Relative to the initially higher performance with AI compared to the human, there was a larger performance drop, marginally significant, for the retest when repeating tasks learned with AI. It might be expected from the theories of zone of proximal development, ZPD, see reference 77, or flow, ZPF, see references 6 and 29, that weaker teammates would learn better by their teammates pushing them slightly beyond their current ability. Yet it was instead stronger teammates who had slightly lower, marginally significant, absolute retest performance for the AI tasks. Aside from random chance, one explanation for this is that stronger teammates were acting as teachers in the interaction. Since they had to understand the code well enough to help their weaker counterpart to understand it too, perhaps they engaged with the code more deeply, allowing them to reproduce it more quickly in the retest. This model, called near-peer teaching within medical education, does seem to correlate with academic performance for the teaching student, though selection bias is likely present in observational studies. Another possibility is that stronger teammates served as a, quote, rate limiter, end quote, pacing the team according to their own understanding. As noted in section 7.4.3, weaker teammates may have hesitated to admit confusion or request a slower pace. The confidence intervals in table 7.2 align with this interpretation, in that weaker teammates trended toward better learning with humans, though the effect was inconsistent. While many weaker teammates may have benefited from human explanations, others may have learned more effectively with Copilot, where they could progress at their own pace. Finally, as was expected, Copilot helped participants complete tasks much more quickly, thus leaving plenty of time for passive studying at the end of session 1. In contrast, human pairs sometimes finished late or with little time to review and consolidate their understanding. This may have disadvantaged weaker teammates in particular, who may have had unresolved questions but lacked time or confidence to raise them. 7.5.3 RQ3. To what extent does the workload associated with educational programming differ between the human-human and human-AI team paradigms? Mental demand, temporal demand, and effort were all significantly lower with Copilot, while frustration was not significantly different. These findings indicate that learning is likely more active in a human-human team, but there is a possibility of covering less material before becoming cognitively fatigued. The differences in mental demand and effort mirror a prior study comparing solo and AI-assisted paradigms. However, that study did not find a conclusive difference in temporal demand. A possible reason for this is that there were many more tasks available than the participants would likely have been able to complete in the time limit. The result was that very few participants completed all tasks with any time to spare. By comparison, the task pools here were designed to be completed approximately within the time limit, so many more participants completed them with time to spare. As such, participants here likely felt considerably less rushed in the AI condition, where they were not working up to the time limit. Frustration trended lower in the AI condition, but not significantly so in line with prior work. It seems that participants were not particularly frustrated in either condition. Whereas frustration is a workload state associated with high arousal negative emotion, participants generally reported positive moods throughout the study. 7.5.4 RQ4. To what extent does the emotional impact of programming as measured by emotional valence and arousal differ between the human-human and human-AI team paradigms? Though mood ratings were overall positive in valence and neutral in arousal, the emotional impact of programming was significantly more positive and arousing with the human teammate compared to Copilot. This led to an overall more enjoyable and engaging experience despite lower performance and higher workload. From a control value theory perspective, these findings suggest that human collaboration increased both the activity value and the social value, producing high arousal, positive emotions. As seen in the qualitative emotion results, social value is the fulfillment from two-way reliance, which maintains control on both sides. The activity itself also becomes more fun and therefore more valuable. Findings also supported that productive team conflict encouraged curiosity at the epistemic incongruity object focus. This is an exciting finding, suggesting that students are willing to invest more effort in the learning process when working with a human partner than with an AI coding assistant. Research on desirable difficulties shows that moderate challenge can promote learning, whereas tasks that are too easy may reduce meaningful cognitive effort. Workload alone therefore provides an incomplete picture of the learning process. While excessive workload can lead to discouragement or frustration, this was not substantially lower with Copilot. And the more positive emotions observed in the human pairs suggest that the higher workload was productive rather than harmful. Arousal tells a similar story, with the mean difference of 2 Likert points out of 7 pointing to a heightened alertness within the true social interaction. Given that optimal arousal is important for human performance, it is likely that the participants were performing better as individuals in the human team, even as Copilot artificially inflated their AI-assisted scores. This was also reflected by the self-grade findings discussed in sections 7.5.2 and 7.5.3. 7.5.5 Implications and Recommendations. We strongly recommend that educators look for opportunities to integrate human-human pair programming into their programming courses. The strong emotional benefits amidst lower performance and workload suggest that students will work harder more happily with their peers than with AI. There is a clear benefit and appeal for students to use Copilot on their coursework. It will make programming easier and faster for simple problems, potentially without the major learning consequences that many fear. Going beyond the conditions of this study, however, it is easy to imagine how human-human pair programming could surpass AI-assisted programming. Most participants here had plenty of spare time to study passively with Copilot, making efficient use of a fixed 20-minute period for that purpose. The slower and more active studying process of the human-human condition either left participants with better understanding of less material, i.e. tasks completed, or a better but incomplete understanding of a similar amount of material. What is not clear is how additional time might be used in a non-experimental setting. With Copilot, participants rarely needed additional time to further study the tasks. With the human teammate, however, participants were so energized and engaged that they might reasonably have taken extra time if they were allowed. Similar to prior work, our results indicate that Copilot can still be used as an effective educational tool and should not be dismissed completely. With the observed performance benefit and inconclusive learning effect, Copilot seems to offer very accessible and low-stakes information retrieval for students desiring to learn. Prior work has shown evidence that human-human teams can be augmented with AI for a best-of-both-worlds scenario. It seems plausible from our findings here that having Copilot or another AI-based tool to fill in knowledge gaps would have been helpful to some of our human-human teams. However, the loss of control and autonomy reported in prior work was also replicated here and makes introducing AI into human-human teams hazardous. While power dynamics already govern human pair programming, adding an omniscient oracle risks an automatic deferral away from student control. One possible solution would be to encourage pairs of students to voluntarily modify the behavior of their AI tools to align with their learning goals via intentional use of system guardrails. Another possible feature, which Copilot does not offer, is user-defined rate limiting. Perhaps if students could view Copilot's help as more scarce, they might take better advantage of their human teammate in the average case, only turning to Copilot when stuck. Prior work has shown that students who turn to AI later in the problem-solving process tend to perform better. This could also help with students being annoyed by Copilot's proactive, sometimes too eager auto-completion suggestions observed in prior work. Overall, while there is no reason that the benefits of both paradigms cannot theoretically be combined, extra care needs to be taken to ensure that the social benefits of human interaction are not disrupted by adding Copilot into the mix. Prior work has found that easy access to generative AI models is already eroding social interactions in introductory programming classes. 7.6 Threats to Validity. Regarding internal validity, reliable inference is very challenging with a small sample and the multi-way clustering inherent to this area of inquiry. We defend our statistical method as a best-in-class approach to handling our data, but acknowledge that spurious results, type 2 errors, are possible. We used p-value adjustments within each of 4 families, 1 per research question, to mollify risks to our conclusions. Regarding type 1 error, we reported confidence intervals and effect sizes to contextualize our results. With respect to endogeneity, we designed our study with careful counterbalancing procedures in mind and made our 2 task pools as similar as possible. To ensure no major confounding effects remained from ordering or task pool differences, we also used walled tests to challenge the parsimony of our regressions. A final concern is the dependence structure of emotion measures. The within-subjects design means that participants' changes in emotion were possibly influenced in magnitude based on the ordering of their trials. Counterbalancing should have mitigated any bias in the conclusion of RQ4, but the absolute magnitude of emotion changes might show higher uncertainty based on the impossibility of resetting one's emotion back to baseline. As such, the absolute changes in mood ratings should be interpreted with caution. As far as external validity, this work was conducted with a small group of highly organized volunteers at a selective research university in the eastern United States, so attempts to generalize our findings should consider this context. The pairing of participants was also done by convenience and may not reflect an intentional pairing strategy performed in an instructional setting. As discussed in section 7.5.5, we suspect that participants might have behaved differently in the 2 experimental conditions had they been offered additional time in a naturalistic setting. Ultimately, real students will not spend a fixed amount of time learning regardless of whether they collaborate with a human or an AI assistant. More likely, an internal risk-reward balance will determine how much time they invest. Further research should explore what factors determine how much time a student is willing to invest into educational collaborative programming when allowed to choose for themselves. Finally, it is challenging to balance design consistency with the realistic complexity of real-world programming tasks. Copilot was known to be reliable at solving the tasks selected from human eval, but it remains to be seen whether messier or more poorly specified tasks might have been performed or learned better through a human-human paradigm. Additionally, it is possible that for such tasks, the human might need to be more involved in helping Copilot, such that differences observed here might fade or change. 7.7 Conclusion. This mixed methods laboratory study used data from an experiment with 11 pairs of novice and intermediate programmers to compare performance, learning, workload, and emotion between human-human and human-AI team paradigms. Prior work suggested that an AI teammate would improve objective performance and reduce workload compared to a human teammate, but it was not clear how self-perceived performance, learning, or emotion would differ. We used linear regression and wild cluster bootstrapping to perform within-subjects comparisons between 2 experimental conditions, which were administered in a counterbalanced design. A qualitative questionnaire helped to explain the quantitative results. We found significantly higher performance and lower mental demand, temporal demand, and effort in the AI condition, but mostly inconclusive effects on self-perceived performance, frustration, and learning. There was some very limited evidence for worse learning in the AI condition, especially for participants who were the stronger member of their human-human team. The emotional effect of programming was significantly more positive and arousing in the human condition. We conclude that students will likely work harder and more happily in educational programming contexts with human teammates than with GitHub Copilot. We recommend that human-human pair programming be reconsidered for its power as an educational tool, and recommend that students maintain autonomy and social activity if they choose to augment their human-human teams with AI assistance. Acknowledgements. We thank Jennifer Berman and the UVA Link Lab for supporting the AI Coding Workshop series where participants were trained. This work was supported by the University of Virginia Distinguished Fellowship, NSF National Research Traineeship for Cyber-Physical Systems 1842490, Graduate Research Fellowship Program for Computer and Information Science and Engineering 1829004, and the Virginia Commonwealth Cyber Initiative Central Virginia Node, GR102900.